Hey guys, we're going to be building the DBE Blues Crusher in this video. I'm going to do something a little bit different than the usual build reports. This is going to be some details on actually how to build the actual effect. So one of the first things I do is just double check on the bill of materials that there's nothing that's too exotic, too difficult to find, and that I have everything on hand. The 4448 is very similar to a 4148, so they're fine, and all these values I've already checked are pretty standard, so I don't need to worry too much about those because I've got a big repository of parts obviously with the web store. It's a standard switch, and I've got the potentiometers ready. This IC is very common. I've got many of those on hand as well. So and this diode's very common too. I have those too. So everything's pretty standard for this one. It's a good idea also just to read through the build doc as well. The build doc you're seeing now may not be the final. We probably will change it a bit as time goes on. I'm actually building this as a second prototype to what Eric's already done. So we'll just change a few things around as we go. So Eric's also got some modification details on how you can modify the pedal as well. So it's a good idea, if the modifications interest you, it's a good idea to just socket whatever values that he mentions, so that you can just play around with them and see if you actually like the modification or not. You obviously have to do that before you start. Make a note of it before you start. Otherwise, once you start putting those components in, you'll probably forget which ones are which. So it's a good idea just to actually print off this bill of materials and then put notes on here as to which ones have the modifications that you want to do, which is actually exactly what I'm going to do now. So the only modification I'm actually going to do is add a socket for the IC. All the other ones are pretty standard, but I'm just going to build this as per the stock bill of materials. Make it pretty straightforward. So the first thing I'm going to do is get my potentiometers ready. These little tabs on the side you just snap off, and this one here is a little handy tip for you. See, it's got that little slot in the middle of the shaft. If you tighten a knob on that really tightly, you can actually make that shaft bend together. So I saw someone, actually I think it was Dead Astronaut, it was his idea, take that little tab off and then stick it down the middle so it stops it from doing that. Like so. And then it'll stop it from squeezing together. So Eric says this will fit in a 1590B, and I'm going to just put these potentiometers just roughly on the front of the PCB just to see what sort of spacing that we're dealing with. I note that I think he actually doesn't use these potentiometers that have these little covers on the back of them. So I'm just wondering if the extra width of the potentiometer is going to actually make much difference, because I do recall he said one time that it is a snug fit, not this particular build but a different build. So I'm just going to double check that before I commit to soldering them in with the protective backs on. So I've just got an enclosure here. This is obviously an enclosure that I've painted because the colour is just so good and it's such a thick coat. Not necessarily the enclosure I'm going to use, I'm just using it to test the fit. And if we put the PCB inside, it actually is, hopefully you can see, a very tight fit. Well, it's not a very tight fit. I could actually wedge that in, but I think that it would be better to take those covers off, because I'd actually rather have a bit of play with the pot. So because the drill holes won't be exact, so trying to shove them into drill holes with no clearance on the sides could be difficult. So I'm actually going to take the pot covers off. Now to get into the actual build, I'm going to solder on all the components on all the components you can see here, excluding the switch. That's the switch spot down the bottom, and the 3 potentiometers. This is because once you put the potentiometer on, let's say you solder this one on, you obviously can't get to the back of the PCB anymore, so you won't be able to get to the back of these components to solder them in. So this is the last thing that you want to do. You can of course just bend the potentiometer up if you do need to get there for some reason. You can just bend it back like this, but Obviously, you're putting stress on the PCB and the component, so it's not something you want to do a lot of. It's mainly just to double check for soldering errors or something like that later on if you encounter one. So let's start putting in the components. I'm going to start with the sockets first, and then probably the resistors, and then the capacitors, and then anything else left on the PCB up the top, and then I'll do the potentiometers and the switch. So I forgot to put the sockets in, of course, but it's not too late, so I'm going to put those in now. I'm also going to put sockets in for the diodes, just for the hell of it. I've got a few spare sockets lying around, so I'll do those at the same time. So I've gone ahead and put the resistors all in. It's pretty straightforward. You just follow the bill of materials and populate the PCB. Just go one by one, take your time, cross them off as you go along. So next up we're going to do the capacitors, and this is also pretty simple. Just follow the bill of materials again, and we've put on there that what type of capacitor they are as well. So film, ceramic, electrolytic, makes it nice and easy. These are just one example of what film and ceramic caps look like. They can look a little different, but these are the ones I'm using. This is a box type box type film cap and a MLCC ceramic cap. So that's the capacitors done. Now I'll put in the diodes and the IC, and then we can go on to the switch and the potentiometers. Just be wary when you're installing the diode that you put it around the right way. As you can see, there's a little white line. That indicates the cathode, and it has to match with the white line on the diode. So in this particular situation, you'd put the diode in like this. For the clipping diode, I'm going to use some of these Russian germanium diodes. I'm going to use two D9Ks for two of them, and I'm going to use the 1N4148s, two 1N4148s, which are silicon, modern silicon for the other two. I like that combination. It sounds good to me, so that's what I usually use when I am choosing diodes for clipping. That's usually what I like to do. You can do whatever you like though. You don't have to do this combination. You can just have all silicon if you have trouble finding the germanium diodes, or you can do whatever you like. You can even use the 1N4001 that we used before. You can put those in. I don't particularly find that's a pleasing sound to me personally, but it will work and it will still sound pretty good. Again, watch the cathode on the diodes, that they're the right way around. It doesn't matter so much for the clipping stage. It'll make a minor difference if you put them in the wrong way. So that's the diodes done. Now we're going to install the IC into the socket. And you might be able to see on the socket there's a little notch on the top. I've soldered mine in deliberately on the PCB to match what's on the silk screen of the PCB. So here's a board that's been untouched, just so you can see what's going on underneath the socket. See that the little notch on the top there? If you just line the socket up with that, so when you install it, you install it that way, so the notch is at the top. You will remember which way to put the IC in when you do that. Where the little dot is where some ICs will have the actual notch cut out. This one actually doesn't, but the notch would go at the top there. So the top where the dot is pin 1. So to install this, you'd go this way with pin 1 closest to the notch, just like that. Of course, the good thing about using a socket for the IC is if you put it in the wrong way, it's easy. You just pull it out, flip it around, and you've corrected the problem. If you solder the IC directly to the PCB, you've got to unsolder 8 pins from the bottom, and it can be quite tricky. So if you're new to guitar pedal building, I'd highly recommend using a socket. So we're getting towards the end of the effect build. All we've got to do is put the switch in and the 3 potentiometers. Just make sure you put the right values into the right places, and then just solder 4 wires, as you can see down the bottom on there, and we'll use that for testing. So this is obviously one of the few components you actually solder from the top side, not the bottom side. Next we'll do the switch, and the switch type that we need is an on-on single pole double throw. It's called a miniature type and it looks like this. So once again I've blue tacked the switch into the PCB and I'm going to solder the lugs on the top side. So the only thing left is to put these 4 wires in, and I like to solder these on the top side again. One little detail I forgot, because I took those the protective backs off these potentiometers, they will make contact with the bare solder joints on the back of the PCB. So just make sure you put something on the back of it, like some electrical tape or some foam tape, just to insulate them from the solder joints on the back of the PCB. Now it's time to actually test the effect. You can hear what it actually sounds like at this point, and it's best to do it at this point as well, just to make sure you haven't made any errors. Obviously, if you wire this up inside an enclosure without testing the effect first, it's going to make the project even more complicated, and if you do have a problem, it'll be a lot harder to find where the problem actually originates, because you've added an extra layer of complexity. So let's test it. I have videos specifically on how, going into detail on how to test your effect, and I'm not going to go into that now, but if you want the schematic on how to test the effect, go to my website, which is diyguitarpedals.com.au, click on DIY GP, that's do-it-yourself guitar pedals, PCBs and kits. Click on the first project, which is 7-minute fuzz. Scroll down to bill of materials and build guide, and then scroll down to page 6, and you'll see this is the wiring diagram you need to follow. So you just make these connection with alligator clips to a battery, you can use a mono jack, you don't need a stereo, just connect those two together. The negative of the battery and the ground will connect together on the one sleeve lug of the jack, and you just hook it up like that, and then you can test to make sure that your effect works. I'll say it once more. I say this very regularly in case this is one of the first videos you've seen. You really want to go to the extra effort of doing this at this point. As I just said before, a nightmare if you just skip this bit and go, forget it, I just want to get this thing together. You'll have a lot of trouble finding a problem if one occurs. So let's test the effect now. So it's actually the next day now. I actually ran out of time last night to finish the video. I still haven't tested the actual effect yet either. Hopefully it's going to work. I don't know, it's part of the thrill of building pedals. And I'll turn on my amp, we'll give it a test run, see what it sounds like. It's wired exactly the same as the schematic I showed you. I just use this little test box because it's quick to hook up a pedal to, and it's got true bypass too if I need to bypass the effect for whatever reason. So it looks like it's working just fine. This is the diode clipper, so you should hear a difference when we flick it over. And there is. And then we've got, I can't remember the knobs, that's obviously volume. And that's tone. And that's clipping. Which, when you turn the clipping down, you lose a bit of volume, but that's normal. So that's the sort of live build of the Blues Crusher. I wanted to do something a little bit different than the usual, just build report and sound demo for this one. So I hope you liked the video. If you want the PCB, of course, they're on the do-it-yourself DIYguitarpedals.com.au shop, and they will be, I don't know what they'll be priced at, but the DBE range is the sort of economy range, so they'll be priced quite cheaply, and you can get one there. I'll leave a link in the description below if you want a PCB. If you've got any questions, of course, you can leave them in the comment field below, and your general impression of the build or the video, please leave them below. Interested in your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for the next video. Cheers.